Hello, and welcome to another episode of the Mojito Movement. We've given up on saying what number it is because I can't fucking remember. It's gone beyond 10, and like every PT, lost count. But today I'm joined by a absolute legend. Let me redo that because that's poor grammar. An absolute legend. And Olympian, no less. I need this mojito apparently. Izzy, introduce yourself. Actually, before you introduce yourself, we cheers the mojito.
Cheers.
Cheers. Let me know what you think.
Okay.
That is delightful.
Yeah, it's a good one.
There we go.
Mm-hmm.
Rocking the alcohol-free rum as well,
Mm-hmm.
which is, well, I'm not, but which is, a first. Is it all right?
Yeah, it's good. Yeah.
Excellent. So introduce yourself. Let everybody know who you are and where they can find you.
So I'm Izzy Songhurst. I'm a Team GB trampolinist. Recently competed in the Paris Olympics. You can find me on Instagram at izzy.songhurst and the same username on TikTok.
Amazing. Well, thank you for coming on.
You're welcome.
First Olympian, which is
really wow,
which is good. It's exciting. So let's go right back to the start. How did you get into trampolining? How did you go from this is fun to I'm at the Olympics, Team GB?
So trampolining has pretty much been a part of my life literally since I was born. My mum actually coaches gymnastics and trampoline, and because she was a single parent, I think basically when I was younger she would just take me along with her to classes when she was teaching. Probably just put me on a trampoline one day, which I obviously enjoyed, and then she signed me up for classes, so I started doing it when I was really little, and then obviously showed that I was relatively good at it, so then I started competing when I was quite young. I did a lot of sports alongside trampolining, so I did artistic gymnastics, I did swimming, I did horse riding, athletics, but really trampolining was the one thing that I always really loved, and I think also knowing that I was pretty good at it kind of helped me be like, oh, this is the thing that I want to do.
There's nothing better than the confidence that comes from knowing you're quite good at something.
Yeah, definitely.
Like, as long as you can channel it in the right way and it doesn't become like a complacency and an arrogance thing, I think it's always good when you know you're good at something. Yeah,
definitely. I think when I was younger, I always liked the fact that I had something that I was doing that made me different to a lot of people. And I was doing gymnastics and trampolining almost like full time when I was younger. And it got to a point where it was no longer an option to be able to do both full time, because obviously I had school and my education was getting more serious. So I had to make a decision which one I was going to commit to in the long term. And I was good at both. Like I got to national level at gymnastics as well. But I think there was just that part of me that just knew that trampolining was the one. And again, I knew I had a much better chance of being better at trampolining than I did at gymnastics. So that influenced that decision. But ultimately, like I just loved trampolining. So
yeah, I mean, it's an incredible sport, and obviously it requires a great deal of natural talent and ability and dedication. But it also looks like probably the most fun sport.
Yeah, definitely.
It's one of those, I think anyone that's ever been on a trampoline, like you just have fun, like even if you're not that great at it, like you just have fun. It's one of the things that, like, when I think back to being at school, a lad I went to school with was very good at trampolining, and he was again, like he was for like county and stuff up to a certain age group. I don't know at what point he stopped and started playing rugby, but he was always off doing like competitions and stuff, and so we naturally did quite a lot of trampolining because his dad was the head of PE. And every time the trampolines came out, I was like, this is going to be great. This is going to be an hour of just like fucking around.
Yeah, literally. It's good fun. I mean, there's only a handful of sports where you get to like defy gravity, essentially.
Yeah.
Like obviously diving, gymnastics and trampolining, pretty much like you just get to throw yourself around and you get to do somersaults, and yeah, it's just so much fun. And I feel very lucky to be able to do a sport that is really fun. Also like has a really big element of danger to it, which is kind of exciting. And also like, you know, when people watch me do what I do, they're just like, how do you do that? And I'm like, I don't know how I do it. I just do. So
I mean, on that, like, how conscious are you of like the movements that you are doing within a routine? Because you look at it and it's like, I mean, fucking like I've tried to do like somersaults and backflips before, and I'll be honest, I have no fucking clue what's going on midway through. How do you maintain that composure to to execute one move, but make sure that you land in the right place so that you can go seamlessly into the next one. Like, are you actually aware of what's going on, or is it a little bit of a little bit of luck?
No, 100%. I'm aware of what's going on. I think the main thing is just practice with trampoline. It's one of those sports where you just get good at what you practice, but also it's because it's a perfectionist sport, you actually never, most of the time, end up doing something that's 100% perfect. It's more about learning how to adapt based on, like what you do before into the next element.
Yeah.
And kind of learning what you need to do with your body, what you need to think about in order to be able to stay on the trampoline realistically, and also be able to stay in the middle and set yourself up properly to then be able to go into the next element and be able to do that to the best of your ability. So it's very much like trial and error in training, and also just learning how to adapt. And a lot of the time that does mean taking risks. If you could land, in a slightly compromised position on the trampoline in terms of how far away from the middle you are, but actually learning how to then adapt so that you can get back to the middle and then be able to carry on and complete a routine of 10 elements is, again, just something you have to learn over time, and you have to kind of reinforce that mindset in training.
I think it's probably one of the reasons why it's a sport that I would never really be able to with ADHD. I would be thinking about something completely unrelated midway through, and then like fucking be off the trampoline before I know it. It's why I was never very good at tennis, on the basis that I would celebrate a good shot rather than a winning shot. So I'd hit a shot and be like, that was great, and then like the ball's gone back past me and like they've won the point, and I'm like, oh, need to pay attention. And I think I'd be the same with trampoline. I'd do like one good flip and be like, brilliant, done it, and I've got 9 more to do.
Don't get me wrong, even I'm like that sometimes. I think probably everybody who does it, sometimes we think, oh, that was really good, and then we forget that we've still got, especially if it's the first element, we've got 9 more to do. So you very much have to be like in the moment. You have to take each skill and be very present as you're doing it. But it's difficult, and it's one of those things, like we do have a lot of people in trampoline who have ADHD, and it is one of those things that they struggle with. But again, it's just about learning that skill and learning also what works best for you in terms of what you need to think about, when you need to think about it. Because I know some people, they find it a lot easier to think about a lot of things when they're doing their trampolining, whereas other people prefer to only think about one thing, or almost try and like not think too much so that there's not so much going on. So it's very individual, and it just depends on what works for different people.
What's your tact? Are you thinking about the entire routine, the very next move, or are you just trying to take yourself completely away from it and almost run on instinct?
I try and run on instinct most of the time, because I find if I think too much, I get too ahead of myself and then I start rushing. Which makes things so much harder for me. So I try and be very present. I'm like, I'm doing this now, and then I'll think about the next thing when I'm doing it. And I'm very much like, I just try and adapt in the moment rather than thinking about skill 10 before I've got to skill 10. That just works for me. But also, I have tried different approaches before, and I've worked with my psychologist to try and figure out what approach works best for me. And I think we've just established that almost thinking less and just focusing on the fundamentals like breathing, just like trying to be strong and push the trampoline properly just works a lot better for me, rather than having all these like technical cues in my head and being like, oh, I need to think about this and this and doing this, whereas actually it's very much like just adjusting and going with that. So
that's fair. I think it's the great thing about sport is that there are the fundamentals in terms of how you execute whatever it is related to that particular sport, but every single person will have a different approach in terms of what brings the best out of them. I love that psychological element of all sport, and the fact that actually it doesn't matter if it's a team sport, an individual. Ultimately, for each person's experience, it is very unique, and everybody will have a different way of bringing the best out of them. And for some people, like you said, it's kind of distancing themselves from it and trying to think about it as little as possible. With other people, it will be actually paying attention to every minute detail and trying to be in control of everything at once. And I think it's incredible that just how the human brain works, and what we can actually achieve by either focusing or actually doing the opposite and not focusing can result in incredible things. So obviously you touched upon the start of your story, obviously your mum kind of dragging you along to trampoline, and it's sticking. At what point did you start to think this could be a career rather than just something that you do quite frequently that you enjoy?
I get asked this question quite a lot, and I don't know if there's a specific moment where I started to realise. I think
no, I need to know the exact day.
It was a Tuesday at this. I think again, because it's been a part of my life for so long, and it's kind of just been that thing that I've always been doing, and I'm always used to having it as a part of my routine. I I think obviously as I started to get older and I started to do more serious competitions and I started to have success, and obviously again that opened the door to then being able to view it as a potential like long-term career. And I think then coming up to the back.
It was at this point that the recording stopped, but thanks to this seamless transition, you'd never know. 1 sec. We'll start that again. Okay. It's just it randomly stopped. I don't know if it's actually... I think we're good. So I'm going to ask you that question again. Cool. Sorry.
I'll try and remember what I said.
So yeah, at what point did you start to think, actually, this could be a long-term career? Was there that defining moment, or...?
I don't think there was specifically a defining moment. I think, obviously, as I got to the end of my junior career, where I'd had quite a lot of significant successes, like I had a year as a junior where I won a British, European, and world title all in the same year. And I think
what was that like?
Crazy.
Yeah.
It's really hard to put into words, but I think it kind of went European first, and then the British, and then the world. So it was, kind of surreal, and I think that really opened the door into me being able to see it as a potential long-term career. And I think then as I was getting close to coming out of juniors and making that transition into a senior, I was obviously watching the older senior girls and who do it as a full-time job, and kind of thinking, okay, well, I've had this success, like there's no reason why, if I don't want to, I can't take it further and do this as a full-time career. Because I think just like seeing that and seeing what they were doing obviously made me aware that it was an option for me. I think, again, because I had success as a junior, it made me believe in myself and kind of made me believe like if I want to do this, I can do it. It is an option. And I think obviously I had the support from my family and friends of, I never really had my eyes set on university, or like I never really knew what I wanted to do education wise. I always kind of knew like I wanted to go into sport and I wanted to be a sporty person. And obviously, being good at trampolining and having that as an option, I just thought, you know what, let's go for it. Like my coach believes in me, my family believes in me, like why not go for it? Like if it doesn't happen, it doesn't happen. But I kind of knew at that point when I was about to make that transition that I would regret not trying it.
So how old were you at that point?
So I was 16. Yeah, I think 16, because when I was younger, you can make the transition to a senior when you're 17.
Okay.
So you can start competing as a senior when you're 17, or you can carry on as a junior up until you're 21, and then you can make the transition. But at that point, I'd kind of done everything I wanted to do with my junior career. And...
Well, yeah, I mean, you won British, European, and world all in 1 year, so I completed it.
So me and my coach kind of established that it was actually going to be more beneficial to me to make that transition earlier and almost like get my foot in the door and get that experience competing in a senior field as early as possible. And I had a routine that was going to be good enough to compete at a senior level. So we just decided to just take the leap and do that transition as early as possible. So it was, the right decision. So.
It worked out all right.
Yeah, it worked out all right, yeah.
So I think that comes onto a really nice point, because, again, anyone that's ever achieved exceptional things in any sporting discipline, there is undeniable sacrifice that you have to make. I think it's Gary Neville on his podcast was talking about the fact that he kind of got to an age where all of his school friends, like, they weren't his friends anymore. Like, he was 100% committed to the Man United Academy and making it. And admittedly, on the podcast, I think it's Roy Keane essentially called him a prick for doing that. But it's kind of the sacrifice you need to make. Like, if people don't kind of fall in line with the path that you're on, like, you do have to cut ties with certain people, you do have to miss out on certain things. How did you find that process? Being a teenage girl, wanting to probably like hang out with your friends, go to parties, enjoy yourself and have a really good time, but also there's this other side of you where your family, like you said, your coaches and your support network around you are acutely aware, as you probably are as well, that there's a very good chance of a great career in sport. How did you manage that side of things? Because, again, I've never been in that position where I've been good enough that I've had to sacrifice. I was probably the opposite. It was probably the discovery of women and alcohol that put an end to any chances of becoming a sports person for me.
I think there's quite a lot of factors that fed into it. I think growing up, my mum always taught me to like always work hard, always like do what's best for me. She's a very independent woman and she's very hardworking, so I had a really good role model growing up. And I think also just, again, like I said earlier, about just having that thing that made me feel different and made me feel like confident about myself, like obviously knowing I was good at something, it kind of allowed me to just shift my focus onto that. And yes, I did have to make a lot of sacrifices quite early on. I had to miss out on a lot of parties and a lot of, you know, turning 18. Like I did have an 18th birthday party, but I didn't really drink. I didn't really do the whole party scene. But also at that point, I didn't feel like I was missing out because I knew that wasn't really an interest of mine. The interest of mine was committing to a full-time career as an athlete. And I knew that both don't go hand in hand together. Like I can't do one and the other at the same time. Because they don't support each other. And I think, along the way, like when I turned 18, you know, all my friends went off to university. I had a really big group of friends at school, and pretty much all of them went off to university and were living, you know, the typical uni life. And I kind of went off and did my own thing and became an athlete and committed to that. And it did mean that, you know, I pretty much lost all of those friends and I don't have contact with them anymore. But also, I guess that was just something I knew was probably going to happen because we weren't on the same path. And I still have some friends from school now who have been on that journey with me and who support me, and I'm obviously really grateful for them. And I don't ever look back and think, oh gosh, I missed out on so much, because I just knew that was the path that I wanted to go on. And I knew, obviously from quite early on and having really good role models, that was something that kind of had to happen, or that was what it was going to be. And I had to be okay with that if I was going to make that decision to become an athlete. So yeah, I don't particularly look back at it and ever think, oh gosh, I really wish I'd done that. Like I've had periods of time when I've not been jumping due to injury, where I have had to like kind of shift that mindset of like, okay, well at the moment I'm not an athlete because I can't do what I'm being paid to do. And that then allowed me to go and explore that side of, you know, like going out and partying and having fun and being, you know, more of a typical like 18, 19-year-old. So I have been able to experience that side of it. And I think almost having that time where I could do that really kind of, it kind of helped me recognize that actually, no, this is not something I'm interested in. Like I don't like this side of it. Obviously nothing against people that do, but I'm not really a party girl. I don't really enjoy going out and drinking. So
I think as well on that, and again, I obviously don't want to like throw around like sweeping generalizations, but a lot of people live for the weekend because they don't do something that they love. They're not following a passion. There's probably very few people that are in like insurance or banking or and stuff that when they were 8, 9, 10 years old were like, I cannot wait to be the best at insurance. Like they end up in a job that pays them quite well, and that as a result the party and the weekends, it's an escape from 5 days of doing stuff that they probably don't fully align with. So I'm guessing, from that perspective, it's probably a big factor as to why you didn't feel like you were missing out, because actually you didn't feel like you needed to escape from what you were doing, because you're one of the very fortunate people who was able to do something that you genuinely loved. Obviously being incredibly talented and having the right support around you really helps, but because let's face it, if you were absolutely terrible at trampolining, no matter how much you love it, I very much doubt you would have turned it into a career. So I don't want to play down the talent side of things there, but it probably makes it slightly easier that the things you're perceived as having to sacrifice probably don't feel like that much of a sacrifice, because you don't need to lean on them as much to get that general enjoyment from what you're doing. Yeah,
exactly that. And I think that's why then when I did get injured and I had that time where I actually couldn't do what I loved doing, then I did turn to that other side and explore that other side of, going out and drinking, because it was a little bit of an escape, and it was, I can't have this, so I can supplement it with this. And it wasn't a very productive thing to do, but then at least I got to experience that side of it, and I got to almost like learn, okay, this, when I'm able to trampoline, I don't feel like missing out on this is a sacrifice, because what I have with trampolining is so much better, and I didn't feel like I needed to escape it. But when I was injured, I did feel like I needed to escape that pain of not being able to do what I loved doing. So
and I think it's when we're late teens, early 20s, we all need to have that lesson learned the hard way that excessively drinking a litre of vodka to make yourself look cool is it never ends well. I think it's a lesson everybody should learn.
Yeah, I also think it's I'm not supporting it, but I think I do think it's good to be able to get it out of your system when you need to, and to experience that side of things and experience the party scene if you need to, because I think it helps put things into perspective for you, and it helps almost like put you back on the path that you want to be on, especially if you then feel like you're doing that because you've fallen off of a path. I do think it's good to almost just get it out of your system when you're young.
Cut loose a little bit.
Yeah, definitely.
So a question I have got, and it's something that I have exceptional experience of, because if you've ever met anyone I've played football with, they will refer to me as being made of biscuit, because I spend more time injured than I do fit. How do you manage? Obviously, you've alluded to the fact that you had a period of where you were injured, and obviously you used it as an opportunity to kind of cut loose and enjoy yourself and switch off from the world of being a competitive athlete. But how do you manage that process in terms of when you cannot do the thing that kind of defines who you are to a degree, not even necessarily just in terms of what you're paid to do and what the expectation is from sponsors and what have you, but how do you manage that mindset when you pick up an injury and you're like, fuck, I can't do the shit that I normally do?
I've had to learn along the way, and I've had a lot of injuries, so I have had a lot of time to kind of learn what works best for me in terms of processing that period of time where I'm not able to trampoline. I think at first, I had a really bad ankle injury in 2018, to the point where they told me I might not be able to jump ever again. So during that time, I was kind of almost just running away from the pain of having to accept that maybe I wasn't ever going to be able to get back on a trampoline again. And I didn't manage that at all. I was just doing what I could to get through that period of time and allow myself to work through the feelings.
How did you feel at the time? Because I imagine, again, at that point, if you're on the cusp of, obviously since then gone on to the Olympics, but if you're competing at an incredibly high standard, it's your job, it's your livelihood, and somebody says to you, there's a reasonable chance that this injury actually might be quite significant. Like, how did that make you feel in that moment? Because I can only imagine it must have been, once you've sort of passed that initial feeling of like shitting yourself, there's probably a lot of emotions to kind of work through. So how did you feel in that moment?
I think obviously initially, first like 24 to 72 hours, I was mainly just focused on getting better and getting to a place where I could kind of start to function again. I could start feeling like I could kind of do things for myself.
So before we get into it, obviously you said it was an ankle injury. What happened? How did you pick up the injury?
So I had it was the day before I was due to compete at European Championships. So I was in a different country as well. And I just made a technical error on the trampoline that ended up, putting me in a compromised position. I had a funny landing and then slipped, and I dislocated my ankle, but my bone came through the skin. So obviously
did a proper job.
Proper job. Yeah.
Nice.
So initially they thought it was an open fracture, obviously because of the displacement of the bone and it coming through the skin. So initially they thought it was quite a simple injury, open fracture, close it. And then obviously after the scans they found out it was the bone hadn't broken, it was just dislocation, which obviously then comes with the complications of ligaments and tendons and everything being not very good, in a not good position. So that then they were like, you're kind of lucky because your bone didn't break, but also you're very unlucky because this is a really complex injury. And also because it was my talus, they weren't sure in terms of like big toe function. I was going to be able to like function my big toe again, which is still something to this day I'm having to do rehab for. Like I'm constantly having to work on my big toe strength and the functionality of that. But yeah, initially I was heartbroken when they told me that. I was heartbroken, and then the coming months and weeks I had to almost try and think about what I would do if I couldn't do trampolining, because pretty much when I went into it I had no other plan. I had no plan B, I had no backup.
So what is the plan B?
So I really had to sit and think, oh gosh, like if this doesn't happen, what am I going to do? And I never found an answer, because I was like just determined to almost like prove science wrong and be like, no, you know what, I'm going to get back on the trampoline, even if it's just to do some jumping. Like I'm going to get back on a trampoline and I'm going to get back to a place where I feel content with, even if I can't do it properly again, I still have managed to return and do a whole rehab process and return to trampoline. But that whole rehab process, I was just completely lost. I had no idea what the future was going to hold. I had no idea if I was ever going to love something the same way I loved trampoline again if I did have to go and find something else to do. I was just completely lost, and then because of that I was then filling that void with alcohol and partying and almost just distracting myself from...
Makes sense.
To
be fair, obviously now I know how bad the injury was, I can completely understand why you'd go and get drunk. It's necessary. I mean, I completely get it. I've only ever played football to a semi-reasonable standard, and every time I've picked up injuries, they always seem to be quite long-term injuries, and it is really difficult. I got diagnosed with a condition called POTS probably coming up for about 2 years ago, and as a result I can't play football anymore because I'm a goalkeeper, and if you've got blood pressure issues when you change your posture, it's not great when you're throwing yourself around like an idiot trying to get in the way of a football. And that was really, even just doing something that I do for enjoyment, that was really hard for me to get my head around, in terms of that you've gone from that moment where at one point in my teens and 20s I was probably playing 4 or 5 times a week, and then all of a sudden you kind of hit your 30s and your body my body started to give up on me at my early 20s, to be fair, but you get to your 30s and your body's like, it's really almost time to call this a day, and you're like, I'm not prepared for that, and then you get diagnosed with something like POTS and you go, I've got no fucking choice. I tried to ignore it for a while and carried on playing like 6-a-side, and there were games where like I genuinely, by the end of the match, my symptoms were so bad I would literally just be led on the floor behind the goal, like unable to stand up without going dizzy.
Gosh.
And everyone's like, you okay? And I'm like, yeah, I'll be fine, just leave me. And it was like that, almost that reluctance fucking can't even talk, that reluctance to accept that you can't do something. And again, obviously that's just from a recreational perspective. Like I can only imagine that when it's your job, it must be even bigger. Were you worried at any point that it may like have altered your love and enjoyment for the sport when you go back? Like, were you worried about there being anxiety around being back on the trampoline, or was it one of those things where you were just like, no, I don't, like, I'm just getting back on it? And
so I think it got to a point in my rehab where something flipped in my brain, and I was just fueled by just pure determination to just get myself fit and healthy again and get back on a trampoline. That was pretty much the thing that was leading me through the back end of my rehab. The anxiety and the confidence issues then came when I got back on trampoline, and I was then confronted with having to do the skill again that I'd had the accident on, and almost having to find that confidence to jump when I was getting back to competing, jump in a way that was going to allow me to be competitive and not just... for a long time I was jumping with pure fear, and obviously when you're jumping with fear you're more likely to fail because you're jumping holding yourself back, whereas
you're tense
you're tense and you're not, like, I was just completely overridden by fear, and I wasn't then concentrating on anything else that I was doing. So for like a couple of years after that injury, I had a lot of failures in competition just because I was just jumping out of fear, and I wasn't jumping in a way that was going to get good performances out of myself. So that's when all like the anxiety and the confidence issues came, and I had to do so much work with my psyche, just trying to build that back up, and just really trying to just trust the process of getting back from such a traumatic and big injury. And I think that's sometimes what people don't realize about big injuries especially, is that although yes, okay, you get back to doing what you're doing, it's then a huge process from then on of getting back to a place where you were before you had the injury, in terms of being fit for competition and being back to that same place you were before you had it. So it's regaining that competitive edge, isn't it? Because again, you see it all the time in so many different sports, and again, obviously I reference football a lot because it's a sport that obviously I'm if you haven't noticed, I quite like. But you see it. Luke Shaw is probably a great example. When he moved to Man United, he was really young, finding the best form he's had, and then had a horrendous leg break, and it's never been the same player since. And you see it all the times with players where they get that injury and they lose that fractional percentage. And to anyone else, fractional percentage is nothing. I have this conversation with people all the time when they ask me about, should I be taking this supplement or that supplement? I'm like, you're talking about something that's going to give you a fractional percentage improvement, which for an everyday person doesn't matter. But when you're a competitive athlete, that fractional percentage is the difference between winning and losing. I was just about to say that.
And it's, when it comes down to such fine margins, I think people who don't compete and have never competed really struggle with it, because again, they see you and they go, oh yeah, well, that's your job, you're really good at it, so like just do your job. And you hear people say it about footballers all the time when they come back from big injuries, and they're like, well, it's what they're paid to do, just do it better. And it's like, but that psychological element, if you're not 100% able to get yourself into the right headspace, into game mode, that can literally be the difference between having all the success that you've worked hard to achieve, and or potentially picking up another injury, like you said, in terms of if you're not completely in the right headspace, completely relaxed, in the right body shape, and what have you, that fractional percentage can make such a big difference. Yeah, so what was the kind of that journey like? Was there a specific turning point where you felt like you started to get the better of the fear, or is it more a case of you've learned to live with it and kind of embrace it from that perspective?
I think it was just a really long process. I'd say probably after returning to trampoline, it took me a good 2 to 3 years to actually go into a competition and feel like I was in a similar physical and mental space than I was before I got injured, and feel like I was jumping without a big, or predominantly just jumping with fear.
Yeah.
And yeah, it did take a long time. And I don't obviously mainly I just did a lot of work with my psychologist on just knowing how to let the fear be there, but override it with positive thoughts, and just trusting the process that the more I expose myself to competitions where I had to kind of try and override that fear as much as possible, the further along in that journey of getting back to where I was going to be. And it was a hard process. There's still parts of me now that are different because of that injury, and there's still parts of me that I have to keep working on in order to not fall back into those habits of being more scared of failing than I am of succeeding. But I also think because I had that experience, it's made me a much better athlete now, because I'm able to be much more in tune with how I'm thinking and why I'm thinking a certain way, and I now have the tools to be able to flip that into a positive, and I know how to get the best out of myself even when I feel like psychologically I'm struggling a little bit.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, because shit things are going to happen irrespective of whether you're an athlete or you're not an athlete. Shit things are going to happen, and there's two ways that as humans we can take it. You can either take the lessons from it and you can kind of do the work to overcome it, and it just becomes part of your story, part of your narrative, or you allow it to define you. And I think it's probably again a big difference between why you're an Olympian and why people listening to this are not professional sports people, is that a lot of the time when shit things happen, we cling on to it and we hold it, and it becomes the definition of who we are. When people have had past traumas and stuff, it's in our nature to almost really obsess about it. And I spoke about this on a recent podcast, to the point where when people go through therapy, the first thing you do is you go back and revisit all the things that you've done before, and it's almost sometimes there's too much attention put onto the negative things. What we need to do is accept that it's happened and it's part of part of our story, our narrative, but view it in a way that doesn't allow it to define us and dictate the rest of our life. And I think injuries are a great example when you are a professional athlete, in that you had a near career-ending injury, which probably came from such a, again, like we said, a fractional percentage of something not quite being in the right place at the right time. It's such a small thing. It's not necessarily anything that you did, but it could have had such a massive impact. And then you've got that risk factor every time you step on the trampoline. It's like you would be forgiven for falling into the trap of every time you step on the trampoline being worried that's going to happen again. But I think it's something that makes competitive athletes different. Not even necessarily professional athletes, but just people that compete in sport and continuously get up and go again. That makes them different is the ability to recognize challenges and not see them as defining moments, but to see them as opportunities to learn and to grow. And again, obviously I can only call upon my own experience, but I've had many injuries being a goalkeeper, because as a goalkeeper, your job is to put yourself in the way of the ball. You put your hands, your head, your face, your body, where all the boots are. And I've lost count the amount of times I've been kicked in the head. I've lost count the amount of times that I've had a ball in the face, or broken pretty much every finger on both hands, and had surgery on both hands and stuff. And it's like, if you forever worry about getting kicked, you'll never play again. What you need to do it's kind of recognizing it's part of that process and being able to psychologically draw a line under it and move on. And I think it's, for you, obviously it's been great that you've been able to achieve that, but again, I think the beauty of it is that you've done the work. You like you said, you've worked with a psychologist, you've had a team of people to help both analyze from a literal perspective in terms of, what were the elements that led to the injury, how do we correct that, how do we not make sure it doesn't happen again, but also psychologically to make sure that you are in the right headspace. And I think these are some of the traits that perhaps everyday people can learn, is the fact that when things aren't quite going right, if you can objectively analyze the reasons behind it and you can put steps in place to help recognize how to overcome it, I think a lot more people would probably find that they handle their own mental health and their own situations much more positively. And I think it's a shame that actually it's a very small subset of people that have got almost the mental strength to view it in that way. But like I said, it probably comes down to why there's not as many athletes as there are people who watch athletes.
I think it just got to a point where I was sick of letting my past experiences dictate my present day behavior. And as much as I had to do the part where I went back and I unpacked it all, and I did have to focus on the experience and why it was making me feel and behave the way I was behaving at the time I was unpacking it. It just got to a point where I'd done so much unpacking, I just thought, you know what, like this, it happened and I can't undo it. But now, and again, this applies to anybody, like any day-to-day situation. It's not just an injury as an athlete, it's anything, any sort of trauma people go through. It benefited me more to go, okay, this is an experience that I've had, but it doesn't need to dictate who I am today and influence the way I behave today. Like, I had this experience, and what can I learn from this to make myself a better athlete and a better person, and also then be understanding of other people's situation. And I just got to the point where I was like, I cannot let this rule the way that I'm going about my career, because like I won't be able to achieve what I achieve if I carry on just functioning out of fear and just feel like I'm functioning. I didn't feel like I was performing. I didn't feel like I was training. I was literally just functioning, and I was just doing it just to do it, rather than being able to shift into that mindset of like, no, I want to get better and I want to still achieve the goals that I'd set before I got injured. So and it's amazing because confidence plays such a role in that, because when you are confident, like you said, you perform, you go out and you express yourself on the trampoline, whereas when the confidence isn't there, you don't perform, you just go out and you go through the motions, you tick the boxes and you just do it. You're not enjoying what you're doing, you're not living for the moment and putting your all into it, you're just trying to get through it. And I think it's important, because it doesn't matter who you are, shit things are going to happen. Like with your injury, yes, you can go back and you can analyze obviously what perhaps led to it, but at the same time you can't control it. Like sometimes shit just happens. And it was a fluke accident. Like, it's one of those things, it was just a complete fluke, and it happened, and it wasn't my fault, it wasn't anybody else's fault, it was just a situation, it just happened. And it happens sometimes, and as much as I can look back and go, oh, maybe it happened because I did this, or this person did this, and the situation wasn't perfect, and like, no, it just happened. It's one of those things, like life throws curveballs at you sometimes. It's about how you react to it rather than why it happened, and focusing on that.
100%. And it's always, I'll always love getting like athletes' viewpoints around, particularly around injuries and navigating that, because it is a big part of what you do and what you go through. Everyone always thinks you're an athlete, it's just about competing, it's about all the good stuff. They don't realize that there's all of the shit that comes with it that makes it really difficult. One thing I do want to talk to you about, actually, though, which I think is a really important conversation, is and there's two facets to this. We'll come on to like the second part in a moment, which is kind of like the influence on like the next generation coming through and stuff. But a lot of people obviously look at people who compete in any discipline, whether it's sports, whether it's physique, whatever it is, and you will see everyday people who have no real need to trying to live their lives in the manner of a competitive athlete. You see it a bit more with more of the physique side of things, but from a nutritional perspective, there are a lot of people that end up kind of putting themselves in a position where they're almost trying to be really, really dedicated at a detriment to being able to enjoy themselves. And I always maintain to people, whether it's food or whether it's training, unless you have a specific performance or aesthetic goal that dictates the way that you eat and train, the fundamental of what you're doing should be enjoyment.
Yes,
and
agreed.
I think it's a message that gets lost on social media, and I would love to kind of get your perception in terms of your experience, obviously, as an athlete, in terms of actually how prescriptive and how dedicated is your life. Because again, the perception is that, you know, when you're a professional athlete, that you set meal times, everything's planned out to the nth degree. Like, do you have to live in that manner of way, and if you do, I think it's important to highlight the fact that there's a very specific reason for why you do that, in terms of it's to maximize your performance rather than it being driven from an aesthetic perspective. Because again, there are a lot of women who probably will look up to you in terms of how you look and think, oh, she looks amazing, I want to look like her, and they think in order to achieve it they have to attempt to live a life like you, if that makes sense, which obviously isn't going to be overly relevant for people that aren't full-time athletes.
So going off of what you just said, I'll use like quite a recent example. When we started the qualification process into the games, the way trampolining works is the qualification is really difficult. Only 16 women qualify from the whole world. One of those places is allocated to the continent that don't qualify a space outright, which normally goes to Africa. So Africa already have a space outright. And then in order to qualify 2 women from one country, you have to have one woman who's ranked within the top 3 in the world at the World Cup series. And then you have to have another woman who qualifies into the world final ahead of the other woman to then qualify the second space. So what that meant for me was that because the other person who had qualified was already ranked second in the World Cup series, I then had to qualify ahead of her into the world final. So it meant I had one chance to qualify my space, and it also had to it meant that I also had to beat the current world champion into a world final, which obviously, you know, looking at that, it's a really hard task for me. So we looked at that and we thought, you know what, it's possible, but it's looking very unlikely. So the mindset I got into was, you know, I'm probably going to be a reserve for this Olympics, and I had to be okay with that. So going into that process, me and my coach sat down and we said, okay, why are we doing this? Why are we starting this qualification process? And I said, well, my goal is obviously to go to an Olympics, but obviously that's looking very unlikely now because of how difficult they've made it to qualify 2 women. And I am ranked second in the country because, like, Bryony's, you know, one of the most successful trampolinists ever. Yeah. So the task at hand was very difficult. So we made a plan to go into that qualification process and actually just focus on what my goals were, which essentially was to enjoy the process, try and get better myself, learn throughout that experience of trying to qualify an Olympic space, learn what that means and what it looks like, and almost accept that whatever the outcome was, as long as I had enjoyed it and I had felt like I'd gotten something out of the process, that was enough for me. And if that meant that I got to go to an Olympics, happy days. If it meant that I ended up being a reserve, fine, as long as I had learned and I had enjoyed the whole process. And that then allowed me to get the best performances out of myself, because I'd almost taken that pressure away of it all being for the goal, and actually more being about my personal development, my opportunity to learn. And that then just benefited me because I could go in and I could just really push myself to get the best out of me. And throughout that whole process, I just tried to almost take the pressure off a little bit, because I knew that I was going to be able to get what I wanted to get out of myself better if I wasn't piling all this internal pressure on myself, because there's already a ton of external pressure, you know, from, you know, the people looking in and people almost expecting me to, you know, this was my time to try and get an Olympic space. And, you know, there's a lot of external pressure, I guess. So just throughout that whole process, I was just trying to do everything that made me happy. And that meant that lifestyle wise, you know, if it got to a random Thursday afternoon and I wanted to go home after training and I wanted to eat a chocolate bar, or I wanted to have, you know, like a meal that maybe didn't have the highest nutritional value, like I was going to do that, because that's, you know, as long as it wasn't every day and it wasn't, you know, it didn't become a habit. Yeah, exceptional. That was allowing me to enjoy that process and almost take the pressure off a little bit of like having to meet what I thought was this perfect model or this perfect role model as an athlete, because to me, what a perfect role model is somebody who is you can relate to and who seems real.
Yeah.
And to me, somebody who, you know, has a set meal plan, and I'm not saying this, you know, this does work for some people, but for me, somebody having a set meal plan who eats this, this and this every day, and there's no, you know, room for fluctuation or room for change. To me, that didn't seem enjoyable, and I didn't want to do that whole process, and whatever the outcome was, look back and go, oh, I wish I'd done that differently, or oh, I wish I had not put so much pressure on myself. Because at the end of the day, I got to that Olympics and I was in the best physical shape, and technical wise, I was, you know, the best I'd been on a trampoline ever. But that doesn't then mean that I hadn't had chocolate bars and, you know, like fish and chips, and I hadn't gone out for meals with my friends and family during that time. And I just think it's really important for people to not get too sucked into this unrealistic idea that to look a certain way means that you have to completely restrict yourself, or that you have to copy what someone else is doing, because also everybody's body is so different, and people's bodies react to different things. And I think as long as you've got a clear goal in mind, you can reach that goal however you feel works best for you.
Yeah, and I think it's so important and so refreshing to hear that, because again, from an athletic perspective, from a competitive perspective, a lot of decisions will be taken out of your hands. I say to people all the time, at the end of the day, if there are specific things you want to achieve, then the likelihood is there are going to be elements that you're going to have to do, because otherwise you won't achieve what you set out to. When I was doing physique competitions, I had to live and breathe it. I had to train 5 to 6 days a week. I had to do an hour and a half of cardio every single day. I had to eat the same 5 meals 7 days a week, because in order to look the way that I wanted to, that's what you have to do. And a lot of people don't realize it. They see people doing it and they go, they look great, that's what they're doing, I must do the same to look the same. And it's like, no, the reason why they're doing that is because it's very specific to their desired outcome. And I think it's so refreshing to hear someone in your position who is looking to compete at the highest possible level in your sport and your discipline, actually being honest and open and saying, yeah, do you know what, I didn't sit down and have a fully prepped fucking meal plan and everything's weighed out to the nth degree. And I think that's so reassuring to hear, because again, a lot of people fall into that trap of thinking I need to live and breathe like an Olympian or a physique athlete or whatever it is in order to look and feel better. And it's like, actually you don't. You can live an incredibly successful, healthy lifestyle and still enjoy the nice things in life. And I get why a lot of people do it when you're at the absolute top of your discipline, top of your sport. I get why people will push themselves and they will control absolutely everything that goes into their body. And you look at people like Ronaldo, or you look at people like Max Verstappen or whoever that are right at the top of their sports and have longevity at the top of their sports. Yes, they are doing things that everybody else doesn't do, but that doesn't mean that it's healthy. It means that they probably have a very unhealthy obsession with success in their discipline and are prepared to sacrifice quite literally whatever it takes to get there.
But also that's what works for them probably. They've probably found that commitment and that, you know, not rigidness as such, but it is a rigidness in terms of, I guess, like a nutrition plan and stuff that must work for them, and that's fine, and that will work for some people. I think I'm just one of those people that, like, the more you tell me that I shouldn't do something, the more I'm going to want to do it. So, you know, if a nutritionist was to, which they haven't ever, but if they would say to me like, oh, you can't have this, you can't have this, I'll just be like, well, why? Like, why can't I have that? I'm not asking to have it every day. And I think just for me, it's much easier to have everything in balance. And like, I'm lucky enough to have the education, nutrition wise and lifestyle wise, to know, you know, what's better for me and what isn't better for me.
Simple little things like, if you've got a competition coming up, maybe don't have a few drinks a few days before, because it's gonna fatigue your recovery process and you'll probably perform shit.
Like, I'm lucky enough to know that, and I
go
just
out drinking afterwards.
It's just little things like that. And I think just being aware of that and having that education has just allowed me to go, okay, well, just because this maybe isn't optimal, like, it doesn't mean that this time I can't have it if I want to have it. And that for me is a much better way, because otherwise if I restrict myself too much, then I'll go the other way and I'll just want to like binge drink, and that then is more really harmful than having a healthy balance of everything. So I just think for me, everything in moderation is a much better way for me, because then I can do it for a longer amount of time. I think if I tried to have a nutrition plan, I'd probably only be able to do it for about 6 weeks, and then I would just be like, oh, this is boring, or I want to eat a chocolate bar. So
I mean, I completely echo that. I had my meal plan with my prep coach for, I think it was 10 months straight, and in that period I had 3 meals off plan, and it was fucking horrible.
I bet.
Absolutely fucking disgusting, to be honest. Wouldn't recommend it. But again, picking up on something you said there in terms of, you used the word optimal, and again, people always get sucked into looking at what is optimal, but the trouble is what is optimal from a general population perspective, i.e. if you're looking at things from a very zoomed out perspective, optimal may look like a certain number of sessions per week, a certain amount of calories, a certain amount of nutrients, and you may look at it and go, yeah, actually the rigidity is optimal to get the best performance. If you take a big subset of people and you get them all to do it and you go, yeah, well, this is what gets the greatest results. But when you look at it on an individualized basis, what is optimal for one person is not going to be the same as what is considered to be optimal in general for the goal that they're trying to achieve.
I was going to say, optimal is completely subjective.
And it always makes me laugh, because again, it's something that I get on social media all the time when I'm doing like Q&As and stuff, is people talking about what's the best training split, what's the best macro split, what's the best this, what's the best that, and I'm like, the best anything is what you're going to enjoy and be able to stick to. And you said it yourself, it's about longevity.
It is.
You can take something that would be considered more optimal and is going to maximize your results, but if your potential to be able to adhere to that is only going to be for a matter of weeks, those great results aren't going to fucking stick around very long. So what's the point of something being great for 3 or 4 weeks and then you never do it again and you just gradually go backwards, when you could do something that is maybe slightly less successful, but you can do it for much longer, so therefore the end result is going to be better.
Exactly.
Very similar to your journey in terms of going to the Olympics. If you'd have attempted to qualify for the Olympics in 4 years earlier or what have you, if you're not ready to do it, there's no point rushing that process and be like, no, I want to do it for the sake of doing it, because actually if it's going to be detrimental to your overall journey and results, what's the fucking point?
Exactly.
So I think it's really refreshing to hear that, and I think it brings us quite nicely onto the next thing I wanted to talk about, which is, obviously you've been to the Olympics, you're achieving amazing things in your personal career, but you must now also be in a position where, and I guess it's almost a double-barreled question, is in terms of, are you aware of it, and is it the case, but you must be now sort of being a source of inspiration for the next generation of people. There must be boys and girls all over the country who are like, who've seen your journey and seen what you've achieved and be like, I want to do that. And how does that make you feel? Because obviously I've seen loads of obviously the athletes from Paris Olympics speak about this and what they're doing, and all of their different kind of, like, obviously some of them got like sort of training foundations and stuff they're like putting their name to and stuff. Like, how does that make you feel to be a potential source of inspiration to the next generation, and what's the how do you manage that?
I mean, do you
even think about it like that?
No, I was going to say, it doesn't really it doesn't influence the way that I go about my day-to-day life or anything that I do, because I think, like I said earlier, I think being an inspiration and being a role model is all about realism and just showing that I'm an athlete, but also I'm a human being. And I mess up sometimes. I say the wrong thing. I do the wrong thing. I upset people. I make people happy. Like, I'm just a human being. And I think showing that, to me, if I was younger and I was looking up to a role model, that would be more important to me, is seeing that they're a human being with flaws and, with also things that are good about them. Rather than just seeing someone who almost I don't feel like I can relate to, or that I would ever be able to be like at all. And I think it's nice because I meet a lot of young people nowadays, and I went to a photo shoot a couple of weeks ago, and I had a conversation with this young girl about a leotard collection I've got coming out in a few weeks, and we had a conversation about a topic that's still quite taboo in trampoline, but something that I'm trying to bring up in conversation and kind of normalize a little bit more. And she was just like really thankful that I'd brought it up in conversation, and she was really comfortable talking about it. And I think it's just little things like that pushed me to try and be a role model in the right way, and an inspiration in the right way, of just talking about real things and just showing that I'm not just like Izzy the trampolinist, and I'm not a perfect human being, and that to me is more important than you know, doing all these appearances where I'm like waving and smiling and taking pictures with people, like it's more important to me to just show that what I put on social media is, you know, that's the highlight reel of my life, but also that I have this other side of me that, you know, cares about people and cares about trying to influence and be an inspiration to people in the right way.
Yeah, and I think that's so important because, again, when you achieve success, people obviously want to ride off of that. People want to kind of like commercialize it and what have you, which is great. Obviously, it can be very beneficial from your perspective, but you then have that potential to actually lose your identity in it, and like you said, you just become Izzy the trampolinist, whereas actually you're not. You're Izzy the person, and you've achieved amazing things, but there's all these other facets that go to it, your entire journey. And if it's okay with you, I'd like to dig more into what you just said there in terms of obviously the leotard collection and the stuff that you're trying to do in terms of breaking certain stigmas and stuff, which I think is so important, because there are so many, I guess, issues, particularly with women's sport, where subjects have been considered taboo, so just not discussed. And some of the situations just seem so simple and so easy to fix. And again, obviously I can never have true empathy because it would never be something I'll experience, but you see it from the outside and you kind of go, I don't know why it's a big problem. Like they made a massive song and dance last year at Wimbledon. It was the first year that women could have different coloured like base layers under their skirts or their shorts.
Right.
And it's like, but why has that been a thing? Like, why has it had to be white? And it's such simple little things. And you kind of look at it and you go, well, you feel like in 2025 with all of the drives that we've had and the social media attention that we've had around all of these different initiatives to make sport more inclusive for spectators and for competitors and what have you. And it's like, it's still some of the most simple and basic things, which are ridiculously easy fixes, are still some of the hardest things to get people to even like want to talk about. And it's like, okay, well, you can't talk about it.
Yeah. Like for an example, in trampoline, only over the last, I don't know, couple of years, they've now only just made it or allowed women to wear shorts when they're competing. So up until, you know, a few years ago, women had to wear just a leotard and no shorts when they were competing, which for, you know, the higher levels, it's something we've been used to. So we're just used to, you know, competing in just a leotard. But for, you know, younger people who want to start trampolining, or younger girls who are having to look at that and go, oh, well, maybe they don't want to wear just a leotard. Maybe they want to have the more security and being able to wear shorts and feel a bit more comfortable, especially, you know, young girls who are going through puberty and their bodies are changing and maybe their confidence is a bit affected. Like, for me, it's much more inclusive to allow girls to wear shorts so that people starting out don't get discouraged by the fact that if they choose to start trampolining then, or gymnastics in general, they're then having to commit to, you know, having to just wear a leotard and almost put themselves in an uncomfortable position. Yeah,
I think it's so important because, again, there's so much social pressure for young girls to look a particular way as it is. And it becomes a barrier to entry for sports in general. If girls are not confident in how they look and they're not self-assured and they don't have great levels of you know, their own self-image and self-confidence, and they're potentially very talented at something, but they feel like they don't want to put themselves into that environment because of what they have to wear. I think it's absolutely ridiculous. It's such a simple thing because and again, when you look at it, it's not like you can make such a compelling argument that says, well, actually the only way that you can successfully complete a routine on a trampoline is if you're in a leotard, and it's purely from a performance perspective, and you go, all right, well, fair enough, like, you know, if it's a safety thing, or if it's like you can't physically do certain moves if you're not in that attire. That's not even the case. Like, there's a lack of logic. I had a friend of mine, Harry Shaw, on one of the early episodes. He's a golf pro. He's got his own range of golf clothing, and he's trying to challenge the stigma around golf clothing. And it's hilarious that you look at the professionals, like, they are athletes, they're in ridiculous shape, yet they're not allowed to wear sports clothing. Like, they have to wear a polo shirt and tailored shorts. I'm like, you're trying to get these people to be professional athletes, and you're making them dress like senior citizens. And obviously I know it's a completely different standpoint from that perspective, but you look at that and you go, well, actually altering the clothing in that instance would probably alter the performance. It would actually have a positive impact. Whereas with something like trampolining, with the leotards and allowing women and girls to wear shorts, it's not even going to negatively impact on their ability. So there's no logical argument for it other than the fact that the only argument is, well, that's what they've always worn.
Yeah, and I think
cool story, bro.
Yeah, and I think the thing those two things have in common is it's about aesthetics, and it's about this idea that I guess certain sports have a certain aesthetic, and I think I'm also really glad now that the rules been changed, that women are allowed to wear what they want to wear, because we're also allowed to wear leggings if we want to. So it just allows for a lot more inclusivity, I think. But I think at the end of the day, it comes down to traditional beliefs of aesthetics with different sports and what those aesthetics should be like. And I'm glad that it's finally starting to change, because it will allow people to feel more comfortable with the decision of starting gymnastics and trampolining. So
yeah, and again in sports that are they're probably more female dominant than they are male dominant anyway. I still find it baffling that there are clothing based decisions that don't put the individual at the center of the decision. It still seems really backwards, because again you put yourself in a position where if it's a female dominated sport, every single person that competes is going to have some form of menstrual cycle.
Yeah.
So that means that at some point for a few days through that person's career, there is going to be at least one occasion where a competition falls at a point where they're on their period. And that's going to be, you're going to be feeling probably more sluggish, more lethargic, like you're going to perform less well. You're going to have all of the emotional aspects that come from just being on your period as it is, coupled with the fact that you also can't wear something that you feel more comfortable with. And again, I will never have the ability to have true empathy with this, because it's not something I'll ever experience. But one thing I've heard from every single woman I've ever been with is that when you're on your period, all you want to do is wear something comfortable.
Yeah.
You just want to be comfy.
Yeah, and that's the worst thing about gymnastics, is that when you're on your period, you've got to put on this tight... I mean, obviously, again, it's a choice that I've made, but, you've got to put on this tight piece of material that, then when I go to compete is like, there's a lot on display, and, if you're not feeling 100% confident about your body, like, it can feel very exposing. And also I'm lucky that being at a high level, a lot of the women, we're on the same page and we support each other, and everybody like uplifts each other. But especially for young girls who are starting, like, it's really important that we give them the choice to be able to do what makes them feel comfortable and allows them to still feel like they can do what they want to do and what they enjoy. I
think that's such an important point though as well, because when you are at a high level and you've been doing it for a long time, and you are, potentially late teens into early 20s or mid to late 20s, you become comfortable through exposure.
Yeah.
So when you've been doing something for 10 years, well, it probably doesn't register that much. It will still register to a degree, but you accept it. It's one of those things you go, yeah, this is happening, and you just kind of crack on with it. But like you said, when you're a young girl and having your period is new, is something that you've not really experienced, your body's going through loads of changes, and you've got to deal with all of that aspect, as well as the fact that they probably already feel insecure in themselves as it is, and they want to go and do something that they enjoy, and they're instantly going to feel 10 times more put off by it, because what probably feels a little bit, what's the word I'm looking for, uncomfortable, I guess, at a normal time, when they're not on their period, just gets magnified.
Yeah, it becomes extremely uncomfortable. Yeah.
And it's and I do still find it crazy that we're in a situation where more female dominated sports still hold on to like traditions for no logical reason. But I think what you're doing is amazing in terms of raising awareness, having conversations, bringing out obviously your own range of attire that helps tackle it, because what we want is more people coming into sport. One of my big fears is if I look at when I was growing up, like the Olympics was a really big thing. Obviously all sports seemed really big. There are a number of sports which I think over the last few years are almost losing that young generation coming through, because of technology and stuff, and kids aren't outside like playing as much as they used to, and what have you, and obviously there are certain sports which have reached significant stature in terms of like their public influence. Things like football, obviously it's fucking, it's huge. There's billions in it. And then there's other sports that kind of get sort of forgotten a little bit, and I think it makes it even worse when you've got people that want to get involved in sports that maybe don't get as much attention as they should, aren't televised as much as they should be, and it's like, don't make it, it's already hard enough as it is to get people interested in taking up something that's not football or rugby in this country, maybe cricket. Like, it's hard enough as it is. Like, it should, these sports should be encouraging, inclusive, and actually trying to entice people into them and be like, look what you can achieve, look what you can do, look how great this environment is to help you with your own personal development, even if you don't want to become an Olympic trampolinist. Like, if you enjoy going on a trampoline and you want to try your hand at some competitions, the sport should be welcoming people in and like trying to entice people to want to come and do it, not making people go, I'd love to do it, but I wouldn't feel comfortable wearing that.
Yeah, that's what really encouraged me when I got back from the Olympics, and I did a few appearances. We did like a bus tour around the leisure centres around the area, and I had a lot of kids come up to us and say, like, obviously because trampolining over the last few Olympic cycles, because we've had medal success, has then started to be televised a lot more and it's started to get a bit more attention. We had a lot of kids coming up to us and saying like, oh, I watched you on the TV and like I'm going to start trampolining next week and I'm going to start, you know, like I've been really enjoying it, or like I've just learned, like they tell me they just learned a front somersault. And I think that is one of the things that really made me want to use my platform in the best way that I could to encourage young people or people of any age, just to, if they want to try something, they don't have to be the next Olympic medalist. They don't want to have these huge goals. They can just start it because they enjoy it and because they want to do it. And if we can reduce as many or take away as many barriers for them to be able to start it as possible, that for me is, if I can use my platform to help do that, then I'll do it, because that for me is more important than just being this poster girl like, hi, I'm Izzy, and not using it in the best way that I can.
Yeah, and I love that. I think there's way too many people that rise to a bit of publicity for whatever reason it is, whether it's sporting achievements, whether it's just overnight success on social media because they put up a great post, whatever it is. There's always that potential where people get a little bit sucked into trying to ride that wave as long as possible and just be like, I want as much attention as possible, and to really try and capitalize on it. I think what's amazing is that you're recognizing the influence that you have and the ability that you have to encourage people to get into the sport, to try new things, and not just trying to encourage people to get into the sport, but actually trying to make the sport a better place for those that do take it up. I think it's fucking awesome. I think what would be really good, a really good place for us to finish on is, obviously we kind of skirted around it a little bit. It's the elephant in the room, Olympics, yes, Paris. Olympics. What was that like?
It was just, I always struggle how to summarize it, but it was just a crazy experience, literally from like start to finish, in terms of from the start of qualification, which was, you know, middle of 2023, to then, you know, finishing the games, having all that decompression time, and then having to like reset and come back. Like, just that whole experience was just like absolutely crazy and mind-blowing, and it all went by so quickly. And I look back and I'm like, oh my gosh, did that actually just happen? But yeah, the Olympics itself, it was just a completely, like, it exceeded all of my expectations, and I didn't really know what to expect going in. Like, obviously I'd heard stuff from other people, but I really wanted to just go in with an open mind and just take it for what it was. But yeah, it was incredible. And even just afterwards, like having to experience the whole like come down after the Olympics, and the whole like having to reset and you know, decide whether I was going to go again or not.
Are you going to go again?
Yes, hopefully. Well, yes, I'm committed to the next, however long really. Like my two things that would influence me to sit down and make that decision whether I was going to stop or not would be either my body's telling me that it can't handle the demands I'm putting on it anymore, or that the love and enjoyment has gone. So those are the two things that would push me out the sport, but none of them are there at the moment. So yeah, still committed to carrying on and hopefully making another Olympics, if not another two. So
amazing. I am sure you'll absolutely continue to smash it. And I guess from that perspective, I think a lot of people fall into the trap of assuming that Olympians go through a cycle where you train for 4 years, you compete once, you train for 4 years, but that's obviously not the you'll have competitions obviously annually in between then that obviously keeps you going. But is it always with a viewpoint of, you know, these are the stepping stones in order to get to the next Olympics, or do you just take each competition kind of on its own individual merit, and you plan in sort of smaller scales where you go, right, this is my next competition, everything's kind of focused on that, and then the Olympics kind of almost takes care of itself, so to speak. Or is it a very conscious thing in your head where you're like, I've got to do XYZ because it's for this?
So I think I think once the official qualification starts, so once like the World Cup series start, which are the official qualifiers, I think that's then when, for me, I then start to think about the long-term goal, which is obviously that being my way in to qualify for an Olympics. I think now obviously we're in a post-Olympic year, and you know, as much as I would love to go to another Olympics, it's not in the forefront of my mind at the moment, and it's not what I'm thinking about. Like at the moment, I'm thinking about just getting better. I'm thinking about trying to improve and obviously, you know, enjoy getting back to competition again, almost without any pressure, and just being able to compete freely without, you know, all this pressure of like, oh, I'm having to qualify for an Olympics, or like, oh, I'm at an Olympics. I'm just able to almost like take a step back, and it's really nice. And I haven't had a period like this for a long time, because normally post-Olympic year I've been injured, or, you know, I've just been getting back and I'm having to kind of like get going again. But now I'm in a place where like I've made improvements in training, and you know, I've made some upgrades, and I'm able to just go in and just start that process again with like no pressure and just enjoy it for what it is, which is really cool. Yeah,
it must be really nice. And again, I guess the pressure of the Olympics must be like something, I mean, is it different, or is it just another competition?
Yeah, I think for me, because I really didn't expect to make this Olympics, and I had, like I said earlier, I had my mindset on pretty much being a reserve. For me, this Olympics was literally just about going in, hopefully in the best shape that I could be in, which I was, and just enjoying the whole experience, trying to do my best performance, and just seeing where that got me. I didn't have any specific outcome goals in terms of like, oh, I want a medal, or oh, I want to make a final, because I knew it was such a competitive field that I could either do my best routine and be, you know, 6th, or I could do my best routine and be like 14th. Yeah. So it was all about, for me, just going in and enjoying the whole experience. So in a way, it kind of did become like another competition, because I tried not to big it up too much, so that it didn't come to the day and I was like, oh my gosh, yeah. But, you know, essentially it was the Olympics, and I wanted to kind of have that experience to like step up on, you know, the biggest sporting stage that I was ever going to compete on, and just see what that was going to feel like and what I could learn from it and take that into, you know, the next cycle. So yeah,
amazing. So I think a good place to round off is just to what does the future look like? What's on the roadmap? What's next for you, both in terms of Izzy the trampolinist, but Izzy the person?
Izzy the trampolinist. So I have a World Cup coming up in a few weeks, where again, just getting back into competition, trying to enjoy it. I'm in a really good place physically, so just seeing where that puts me in terms of what scores I'm posting and what I'm able to do in competition. Just pushing on in training, trying to make improvements, just again enjoying it without, you know, having this time to almost, you know, have a little bit of less pressure and just enjoy training and competing for what it is, and, you know, kind of like ramp up again into the, you know, Olympic qualifying in a few years' time. In terms of personal stuff, I've got a leotard collection coming out with the company that I'm signed with, and my first leotard is coming out on the 31st, so in a few days, like 8-9 days.
Yeah, amazing.
And then I'm also currently doing a level 4 wellness practitioner course. So I'm currently doing like the gym instructing and PT part of that. And then I go on to do level 4 nutrition and level 3 wellness. So that's like something I've tried to do to, again, like I spoke about earlier with having the plan B, like that for me is something I've wanted to do for ages, to have something that I feel like is a backup for me, but also something that I can do then post trampolining career, so that I don't feel like my whole life is riding on me being a successful athlete. It's like just having a balance between those two things. So
yeah, I love that. So are you viewing the future professionally as more of a general sort of health and wellness coach, or have you got goals to become a trampolining coach, or what does that look like?
So I'm very much using this to kind of open up doors to see where I kind of want to go. I've considered doing S&C. I've considered kind of like using that qualification to support people within the sport in, you know, whatever area I decide to go into, whether it's like nutrition, lifestyle, S&C, but also just I also want to use my experience as an athlete to help other athletes and other competitors, but also just like, you know, people who have a goal fitness wise or lifestyle wise. I just want to be able to use my experience of being an athlete to help people with whatever their goals are.
Yeah, and I think that's really important, because again, when you've gone down that competitive route, you learn a lot of things, obviously, in terms of what it takes to bring the absolute best out of you, but you also learn the flip side in terms of how you can still achieve great things without going to that level of granularity. And I think it's one of the reasons why I work the way that I do with my clients, is that I've put myself through the position where everything was weighed to the maximum gram, and if it was 1 gram over, I'd lose my shit, and if I missed one meal, I would be the worst person to be around. And I trained with such an intensity and structure that was really not sustainable. And yes, I saw the results that I got. I was in the greatest shape that I've ever been in. I didn't see it at the time, thanks to body dysmorphia, but I can look at the photos now and go, God, I was in good shape, wasn't I? But you learn the fact that actually you're doing these things because you have a specific reason that dictates you have to, and you can take the bits that work and you can go, actually, the mechanics behind this are logical and can be applied to anybody, but you can also then encourage people not to end up going down a path of putting themselves through that when their goal isn't the competition at the end of it, when their goal is just to be happier and healthier. So I think that's awesome. I'm excited to see what comes next, and obviously excited to see you smash more competitions, and I'm sure there'll be many more medals and hopefully for you more Olympics to come, and see you up on that top step. But
hopefully,
fingers crossed. But before we disappear, I always get everybody to do the same thing, so just let everybody know again where they can find you on the socials if they don't follow you already.
So you can find me on Instagram and TikTok at Izzy.Songhurst.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for coming on. It's been a great chat. We probably could have chatted even longer, to be fair. But yeah, we'll get you on again, and we'll keep an eye out. And obviously, good luck with the collection when it comes out.
Thank you.
And obviously, good luck with your competitions this year.
Cool. Thank you for having me.
That is absolutely fine.